Well, we've mentioned body count a couple of times. Let's get into that and the whole framework of corruption and lies and cover-ups that occur in the U.S.
It's simple from what we followed so far. If the success in war is purely an enemy body count, yes, because we're trying to drive the other side bankrupt, and let's presume that, oh, you and Doug are, I'm a general, and that, like, your lieutenants are captains, right? Maybe you're a company commander somewhere. You're under pressure. I'm under pressure to produce a body count, and as a colonel, let's say I'm a colonel battalion commander. If I don't meet my quota, my career's over with. I'll be relieved of command, and if you're relieved of combat command, then your ticket up the hierarchy is gone. So I'm going to squeeze you. And in fact, in some units, kind of where the informal rule was, if you don't meet your body count quota, then we're going to, like, you're not coming in off the field. We'll just leave you. I'll bring you some more ammo, some more food, some more water, but don't expect, you know, you've got to, like, produce the goods. All right, you're under pressure. You're under severe, severe pressure. So what do? Well, you can do several things. One, you can just invent a body count. You can just out of the thin air and just, like, say, call up and have, like, tell everyone in your unit, tell your entire class there at UT to fire off their M16 for a minute, called a mad minute, and call up on the radio and report that you have a body count of 30 or a body count of 5 or something like that. Or say you get ambushed, Frank, and your whole company gets ambushed, and you call in an airstrike and you call in an artillery strike, and there's an armored unit nearby, and you actually have an engagement and you find some enemy bodies. Well, what are you going to do? Well, if you found 10 bodies and you've got 3 different units, artillery, air, and infantry involved, who's going to get the credit? What if you don't give credit to the artillery? What do you think might happen then? What if you say you fired but you missed? Does that sound like a wise policy to you?
The artillery commander isn't going to give you any support the next time
He might be
around.
kind of slow next time around. Or those F-4 pilots might have to have, they might get a little slow too. It's in your interest to reward everyone. And since everyone is under the same system, everyone needs body counts, why sure. We give you 50 Air Force, we give you 50 gunships, we give you 50 artillery, and we on the ground, well, I've got 5 bodies and I've got 5 rifles. We'll count each rifle as 5 persons killed, so that gives us 25. And while we were out stumbling around, we found 10 enemy grenades. I beg your pardon, 10 graves. We'll count them too.
And body parts.
In body parts, say we find an arm or a leg, and say, because sometimes really when the airstrikes did hit, you can't blow people to smithereens. Unlike the war movie where everyone has a nice discreet death, in a real war, it's quite gruesome. There are stories of where people from different units had to fight over arms and legs to determine who was going to get the kill count for their unit.
And of course it got even more pernicious because they would slaughter Vietnamese civilians and include them, I mean children, women, old people, include them as part of the body count as well.
Well, we should get clear on that about, in some areas of the war where U.S. forces were fighting uniformed North Vietnamese troops, there weren't too many civilian casualties. But a whole lot of Vietnam battles occurred way inside the country where there were Viet Cong, and Viet Cong and the villagers were very much the same people. Search and destroy reached the point where if many units burned down villages routinely, and then you go in a village and you burn it, and you see their bunkers there, because everyone in Vietnam had a bunker to hide in, and you hear a noise, and maybe you scream and try to get somebody out, but maybe you just throw the grenade in, or people start to run away from you. And, well, if they run from you, they must be your enemy. And so you shoot them, and you say, well, running becomes a sign of an enemy. Troops are they're afraid, they're trying to survive, they're in a desperate situation, they're under a high pressure to produce a body count. So yes, we got into sustained slaughter of Vietnamese villagers. You go through and you look at a man's hands, And if he's a true farmer, he has calluses. And if he's a guerrilla who's only a fake farmer, he doesn't. So you go and you look at the hands, and those, if he doesn't have enough calluses, then you haul him away and you send him to an interrogation center. Or you look at the ankles. If a man is a guerrilla, he must be running out there in the jungle getting his ankles all scratched up, where if he's a farmer, he wouldn't have so many scratches. So people would go, American soldiers would go around and look at the ankles. Or if he's a guerrilla, if you actually you're a farmer by day and a fighter by night, you must not be getting much sleep. So you've got to have circles under your eyes. So U.S. soldiers would go in and look into the eyes of the Vietnamese and try to decide how many bags they had, and then if you have too many bags, you get hauled off. It was not our country. It was not our culture. We did not speak the language. And by the American way of looking at war, language, culture, history, class structure, these matters didn't matter. What mattered is we had the hardware and they didn't. So yes, people got hauled away for interrogation and never came back. Yes, many villages were burned to the ground and blown up. And yes, many Vietnamese men, women, children, chickens, water buffalo, pigs, piglets, often were killed. Oftentimes when you went into a village, the stories are you shot everything.
And burned the crops.
And burned the crops. And that was...
houses.
And
their houses.
And their houses.
All this was, I guess, part of what you call the Mir Guk rule.
Yes, essentially, if it's dead and it's Vietnamese, it's VC. You know, what it is armies have documents called rules of engagements that are supposed to specify when you can open up fire and when you can't.
On civilians.
Or on anyone.
Right.
But they weren't used much at all.
Mm.
Instead, other kind of rules happen. Like I said, if they run, they're an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they have black pajamas, that was one rule. Some units thought that any Vietnamese wearing black garb was the enemy. Of course, all peasants that wore that as their national dress. So there are all kinds of these fake rules that supposedly distinguish friend from foe. Mm-hmm. But all these rules were wrong in that we just didn't know the culture. They were kind of like fabrications that Americans invented to try to make themselves feel legitimate about who got shot. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, people saw through this and said, look, what's in practice is this is the Mir Guk rule. If it's dead and it's Vietnamese, it's VC. Any Vietnamese we shoot, we're going to count.
There's also the factor of racism, too. I wonder how much they would have done this if they'd been fighting Germans.
Oh, it's probably much less. Of course, it says Guk, slope, slant, dink.
Yeah, and this also tapped a certain sadism, not only in soldiers in the field, but also intelligence people. There were people who would, collect ears and fingers and even heads, and even intelligence people would admit that they really got off to beating up the people they were interrogating. But, it gave them a nice buzz, a thrill to do it.
When you go through soldiers' novels and memoirs, many have made valiant efforts to try to talk about the perverse eroticism of warfare. Sadism, clearly a very strong sadist dimensions, a lot of rape in the field, as well as killing, or a lot of rapes followed by killings and mutilations.